study the human soul scientifically? It's a really important question to me. As a theist, I'm obviously interested in it. I believe in things like souls, but I'm also interested in it because I'm a strong proponent of science. I think that science is a really powerful tool we have for investigating not only the world around us, but ourselves. I also think it's an important question to ask, even if you just believe in God, if you're a theist, or you just believe in science. Maybe you don't buy the other side of that equation. I still think it's a really important question to ask because whether or not science can study the human soul is going to be a really important question if you believe in souls or if you believe in science. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and gesture towards an answer to this question. And my answer is going to start by turning on a terminological distinction. In particular, I want to suggest that whether we answer this question, can science study the human soul, in the affirmative or in the negative, depends to a large extent on how we understand what the soul is. Consider in the first place what we could call the Platonic tradition of the soul. On the Platonic tradition of understanding the soul, and by Platonic here I mean coming out of the philosophy of Plato. Plato was a very important early adherent to this way of thinking about the soul, although it's been picked up by lots of other people, including I think a lot of people just on the street today. On the Platonic understanding of what the soul is something purely immaterial that kind of resides in a human body, such that after the human body has died, the soul could potentially go on to become reincarnated or go on to some other form of afterlife, perhaps heaven or something like that. So in the Platonic understanding of the soul, what's important here is the soul is something purely immaterial that somehow resides in the human body. This way of understanding the soul has been picked up by lots of other philosophers. Something like it is close to what the philosopher Descartes thinks. Lots of other philosophers have thought it. I actually think that this is the definition of soul. A lot of just people on the street, again, like sort of your average person, would say what the soul is if you were to ask them. And I think this is actually true of both theists and non-theists alike. People who believe in souls and people who don't believe in souls alike would often adopt what I'm calling here the Platonic understanding of the soul. That is that the soul is something purely immaterial that resides in the human body. It's just that the folks that believe in souls think that that exists, and the folks that don't believe in souls think that that doesn't exist. On this definition, I want to suggest, again, this Platonic way of understanding the soul, it's very puzzling to see how science could ever study the soul. Why? Well, science is concerned with studying the material world. Some philosophers might argue, and I'm sympathetic to these philosophers, that science by definition is tasked with studying the material world. So if science studies the material world and the soul on the Platonic definition is something immaterial that resides in the body, well, whether or not the soul exists and what the soul is like is something that by definition science can't tell you much about at all. Science is concerned with the material, the soul is purely immaterial. By definition then, the two sort of don't cross paths. But I want to introduce you today to a different way of understanding the definition of soul. Why? Well, because that answer on the Platonic definition is frustrating to me, right? As a theist, as someone who believes in souls, I believe that I have a soul. But as someone who believes in science, it's difficult for me to think that there's no way that science could have anything to tell me about what my soul is like. So I want to introduce you to this other way of understanding the soul that we're going to see answers that question about whether science can study the soul in a very different way. And this is what we could call the Aristotelian definition of the soul. Again, I'm calling it Aristotelian because it has its roots in Aristotle. It's been picked up by all sorts of thinkers throughout the ages. Importantly, it's been picked up by a lot of Christian thinkers. This is the sense of soul that someone like Thomas Aquinas would have used in his philosophy. And on this definition of soul, we don't jump right away to sort of an immaterial thing inhabiting human bodies on the way a Platonic definition of the soul would. Instead, and I want to read you a quote here, and then I'll explain it in just a second. But I think it's a revealing quote in just sort of the direction it takes the definition of the soul. According to Aristotle, what the soul is, and this is a quote, is the first actuality of a natural body that is potentially alive. I'll say it one more time. The soul is the first actuality of a natural body that is potentially alive. Now, we could go and really unpack that definition. We could do all sorts of stuff by investigating what exactly Aristotle means here. But here's the way I want to gloss it for you today. What Aristotle means by the soul is whatever it is that makes something alive rather than dead, and that characterizes what its life is like. I'll give that gloss one more time. According to Aristotle, what the soul is whatever it is that makes something alive rather than dead, and that characterizes its life. That sort of gives the form of its life, that defines what kind of life that thing has. Now, based on this definition, I want you to notice two things. Here's the first thing. On the Aristotelian understanding of soul, every living thing, by definition, has a soul. Not just me, not just you, not just human beings. On Aristotle's definition, plants have souls. Your dog has a soul. Your cat has a soul. Insects have souls. Why? Well, because according to Aristotle, what a soul is just whatever it is that makes something alive rather than dead. So by definition, if something is alive, then it has to have a soul. I think this is a really important thing, actually, because again, I think almost everyone today, theists, non-theists alike, accept this Platonic definition of soul, where the soul is something very immaterial. It sort of resides in a human body, but sort of part of what goes along with that is that, well, we don't, probably no other kinds of organisms have souls, or if they do, it's really hard to know if they have souls because it's this immaterial thing. On Aristotle's definition, something very different is the case. It's that by definition, if the thing is alive, it has a soul. That's the first thing I want you to notice. Second thing I want you to notice about Aristotle's definition is this. It follows by definition that you can study the soul scientifically. So remember, on the Platonic definition, it followed by definition that you can't, since on the Platonic definition, the soul is purely immaterial, and science presumably is concerned with studying the material world. On the Aristotelian definition of soul, by contrast, it follows precisely that you can study the human soul using science. Why? Well, because the soul on the Aristotelian definition is whatever makes me, whatever makes a blade of grass, whatever makes an insect, whatever makes my dog alive, and what characterizes its life, what kind of life that thing has. So when I study the process of photosynthesis, that's what makes a plant alive, that's one of the processes that characterizes plant life, I'm studying the plant's soul. It's a very maybe strange way of talking, but this is precisely the way not only that Aristotle thought, but this is what's important, I think, especially for me as a theist. It's the way that most Christians have talked about the soul throughout history. That, of course, the plant has a soul, and when we study photosynthesis, we're studying the plant soul. We're studying the plant form of life. When we study my digestive system, what are we studying? Well, we're studying what my life is like. We're studying the human soul. Right? Same thing if we're studying the dog's digestive system. We're studying the dog's soul. Whenever we study any life processes of a living thing on the Aristotelian definition, we're studying that thing's soul. And since science presumably offers us a really great way of studying many of the things that not only our life consists in, but that plant life consists in, and that aquatic life consists in, and that reptilian life consists in, it follows that what we're doing there is using science to study those living things' souls. So in answer to that initial question that we asked, can science study the soul? The Aristotelian answer is a resounding yes, it can. And in fact, it's going to be one of the best ways of studying souls. That leaves us with a question, though. Can science capture all of the soul? Apply that especially to us as human beings. Can science study all of my soul? In other words, can all of the activities of my life be characterized empirically? Can they be studied scientifically? Are all of those processes material processes? This is a big, big question, and it's one I can't get fully into today. Needless to say, in the Christian tradition that has picked up the Aristotelian definition of soul, the answer that they give is no. On an Aristotelian definition of soul that's been filtered through the Christian tradition, so this is people like somebody like Thomas Aquinas is going to say, there's aspects of the human life that can't fully be studied scientifically. What that means is that there's aspects of my soul that can't fully be studied scientifically. For Aquinas, what that was, and again, we're not going to do a deep dive into this here, it was the power of the human mind to conduct abstract reasoning. Aquinas thought that that aspect of human life couldn't be fully understood scientifically. Now, that's a contentious point. It's not one that I want to get into now. What I do want to leave you with are two observations. Number one, in answer to the question, can science study the human soul? If you adopt an Aristotelian rather than Platonic definition of what soul is, the answer follows that yes, you absolutely can. All the soul is on that definition is what makes something living rather than dead. And that's precisely one of the things that science is able to do. It's able to determine what it is that makes something alive, right? Plant can carry out photosynthesis, I can carry out digestion, and can characterize the kind of life that living things has. On the Aristotelian definition, that's precisely studying the soul of human beings, of plants, of animals, and so on. Second thing I wanted to leave you with is this remaining question. Can science capture all of a human being's life activity? In the Christian tradition, what the answer that's been often given is no, it can't. There's aspects of human life that can't be accounted for fully by science. That's what I want to leave you with. Not going to give you the argument for that. We'll leave that for another time. Thanks for paying attention, and see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.